Welcome to another edition of Expanding Mind on the Progressive Radio Network. Continuing our conversations about the cultures of consciousness. I've been out of range of the radiophonic device regime for a couple of weeks. I went up to northeastern Oregon to catch the eclipse as part of the Eclipse Festival put on by Symbiosis and a crew of transformative festival groups from around the world. It was a wonderful time. It reminded me of some of the better aspects of old school Burning Man. Saw some great music and had a good old freaky hippie time. The eclipse was remarkable. I thought the most interesting thing that I could add to the sort of discussion around it is just the wonder of kind of watching what happens spontaneously when you see something that you've never seen before. And I had kind of actually gone out of my way to ignore reading about the eclipse and what it would look like and the corona and all that kind of stuff. I didn't really have a very good idea of what it would look like, partly just to maximize the novelty. I mean, you get on in years, and I'm half a century old now. You don't see as much novel stuff as you used to. So it's really quite an opportunity, not only to experience something new, but to watch what happens to yourself or what happens to your emotions in particular. I became a sort of gleeful child, yelling profanities in a most exuberant manner. My friend said it was like looking at, a kid getting his like favorite Christmas present ever when he's 8 years old. And then like my wife, she's started kind of weeping and this sort of sense of awe and wonder and fragility. And I mean, it was just really extraordinary to be around all these people kind of each experiencing their own kind of remarkable emotional exultation at this extraordinary cosmic event, which, though of course they happen periodically and regularly, forever, nonetheless cannot help but strike a certain kind of resonant chord, as if some extra significance is in the picture, particularly in this most broken nation these days. Just looking at the track of the eclipse from the West Coast to the South and right across the heart of the country, you're like, wow. It's almost as if, something in America is eclipsed or possibly, hopefully becoming reborn. And this experience was followed by a really delightful, spontaneous hippie hug, which was different than any other hippie hug I had done. It was just sort of random people in this field were all watching it, and then we did a sort of cinnamon roll where we stood in a line, and then like one side of the holding hands, one side of the line kind of rolled together, and it was very charming and blissfully short, and nobody owned. It was just kind of playful and very childlike, and it was a wonderful way to celebrate this cosmic event. But speaking of cosmic events, things in the sky, and positive varieties of hippie hugs and other pagan falderall, I'm happy that this week we have as our guest Maja D'Aoust. And of course, long-term listeners of Expanding Mind will know that Maja was my co-host for many years. We started the podcast in early 2010, and when I began it, I knew at that time I didn't want to go on just interview guests as one person. I really wanted to team up with Maja, someone I'd met a number of years before, doing research on mysticism in Los Angeles, and we really hit it off and had a great time doing the show together for many years. So I thought it'd be fun to bring her back on and have a conversation, get caught up, as well as to talk about her new book that's coming out. She's already written a book called The Secret Source, The Law of Attraction and Its Hermetic Influence Through the Ages, which was co-written with Adam Parfrey, but I suspect Maja did the lion's share. And her new book is a tarot deck. She's a wonderful artist as well, and she's putting out a collection of the major arcana images that she has created, and I'm very excited about that for her. And in fact, I have some piece of Maja art waiting for me down there in Los Angeles. Next time I go through, I'll pick it up. Looking forward to finding a place for it in my crowded apartment here in San Francisco. So with no further ado, Maja, welcome back to Expanding Mind.
Hi! It's so nice to be back on the show. How's it going, Erik?
It's going well. The only thing I don't like about taking vacations is it takes me forever to get back into gear. I'm as a freelancer, I'm kind of my own taskmaster, and I'm not the most productive person on the planet, but I'm reasonably solid. But when I go away, I have this wonderful feeling of expanse and novelty and relaxation and new stimulation. But when I get back, it always takes me like a week. I'm not meditating. I have to drag myself to yoga. I have to drag myself to get work done. It's just the part of the cycle that I dislike the least. But yesterday, I finally felt kind of lift off, and I'm kind of cruising now again into the busy, productive life. But it's been a great last month, and I know the eclipse is a big deal for you because it signified, as I learned from your ritualdiary.com website, a major change in the Maja D'Aoust persona avatar in the
Yes.
world. The loss of the White Witch, this great brand that you somehow managed to accumulate over the years. I thought you'd never go, and you said, "Look, let's get rid of it. We're going to do something new." So I'm curious about that. Why did you give up the White Witch moniker, and what was it? What'd you do on the eclipse to bring on a new avatar identity?
Yes, it's eclipses. A lot of people know basically are harbingers of change or transformation. Like a lot of the eclipse followers, there's a lot of data out there that talks about how they're alchemically very symbolic for things kind of coming together. But I know a lot of people, ever since the blood moon eclipses really in 2014, have seen the shifts that they bring. So symbolically, with an eclipse, something will be removed from you and then something will be replaced. And there's a lot of literature that talks about if you're willing to make a sacrifice, the thing won't be removed, and you can kind of do it joyously instead of through suffering, right? But change is, as we know, one of the only constants here in this great big cosmos. So when you're willing to make changes and kind of let things go and have ego deaths and offer your identifiers up, you can kind of live a more transformational life. And I feel like the energy that came up for a lot of people with this eclipse was about all of these things we use as identifiers to keep ourselves separate from each other, right? So for me, I was really watching a lot of the community reacting to Charlottesville and what happened with all the racism stuff and how we kind of hold on to these ego identifiers to make ourselves different from other people. Not to be, disrespectful of real culture, like real things that make each other different, but in terms of separators that make other people not human, right? Or remove people's humanity through signifiers. So I really felt like just the whole white and black thing and trying to make distinctions of good and evil on those levels, it's really a good time to try to stop some of those distinctions while keeping the differences. So for me, I did it symbolically, not just for myself to kind of make a transformation and drop an ego identifier that I had lived with for a long, long time in order to just make a change and transform, but also for people of color who are just suffering terribly under a lot of these misidentifiers of kind of good and evil on that basic dualistic level,
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously the word white has a lot of heavy baggage these days, and even though I always sort of found the white witch rather charming because within occult or esoteric thinking, the idea of the white witch has a sort of almost storybook charm to it.
Yes.
Of course, it sits on top of this whole other set of values that's all bound up in these issues that we're talking about in terms of race and associations, cultural associations, a whole legacy of dualism. So,
Yes.
but I'm kind of curious. You're also in addition to being a witch and Angelino, and in Los Angeles, one's personal brand is taken perhaps more importantly than one's physical health or or pocketbook or anything. So it was. I mean, I must say, it was to some sense, it was a sacrifice. It wasn't like a trivial thing to change, the phrase that had been associated with you in articles about you and your astrology work and your healing work and your creative, your very creative form of esotericism. So. It must have still been meant something to let that one go.
Yeah, it felt really good. Like you said, it was very, like how you experienced the eclipse. It was very kind of this liberating feeling of just removing something of that, But I had gotten letters and emails from people in the community. Like within my community, it's really diverse. And Los Angeles is a super diverse city and I love it. And I want to honor all the diversity in it and certainly be part of that and honor the people. And I got feedback from so many people after I made it that said, like, thank you for doing this. And were appreciative of just even the symbolic gesture of it. So I felt really good afterwards. And it was sort of like, people identify you with those things. And as a woman, right, like for me too, because of how I look, right, that benefits me through doing my work because people are like, oh, she looks nice or whatever. Like people will identify you based on all.
Hello? We seem to have lost Maja temporarily. She disappeared. We'll bring her back as soon as we can. I just wanted to talk a little bit more about her, what she's been up to in Los Angeles, and in terms of adding a new face to the sort of esoteric occult world. There's sort of so many. How would you say? Kind of. You back
still
there?
Did it get dropped?
Yeah, you got.
Yeah.
There was a vibrating phone that somehow I heard the vibration of the phone and then it took away the signal somehow.
Oh, poopy. Sorry.
No problem. I was just saying how one of the things I really like about you and how you show up in the world is that there's just so many, kind of boring associations with the way witches or esoteric practitioners look. Like we have all these associations, and it's like it's the same kind of cliches. It's like a mixture of the 60s and Hollywood movies, and so people who are into esoteric have to work really hard to try to freshen it up and make it more kind of contemporary. But a lot of those moves, in my mind, also don't seem to always work so well. And I've just always enjoyed the way that you've brought a freshness to the role while still being willing to kind of step into the part in media, just by being like, yes, I'm a witch. Yes, I'm a practitioner. Yes, I do astrology. Like all of these kind of older things, but you don't look like a gypsy. You have your own style. And it's also really evident in your artwork and in this tarot deck that you're putting out. I mean, this is not your average kind of heavily symbolically dense cards with borders and sort of traditional imagery that draws from fantasy literature and from occult systems. It's much fresher, singular. It's very much your own particular style. There's a lightness to it, even though the images themselves are very compelling and sometimes a little spooky. But there's still a lightness to your style. I mean, it's hard, of course, on the radio to describe your work. But if you could talk a little bit about just the way your art process is to describe these images, this sort of gold on black. And then just talk a little bit about what you wanted to bring to making your own tarot deck.
Yeah, totally. It started, the images really started emerging when I would do meditation. So I do a meditative practice pretty rigorously. Like I meditate a good 4 hours a day. Usually I'll try to do 2 hours in the morning and then 2 hours in the evening. And since I started doing it, I mean, I get up usually before dawn automatically. I don't even try. It's kind of annoying because no matter what, I get up at 5 in the morning now after starting this practice, which I understand happens to a lot of people once they start meditating. They get on this kind of schedule, where you sync up with rising before the dawn. And so I go into these Neigong meditations, which I learned from my teacher, Kelvin DeWolf. And they're kind of similar to a lot of Taoist ancient techniques that they would do. If you look up Neigong on Wikipedia, they'll give a pretty good description of them. And essentially, the images would kind of emerge out of the darkness. Like there would be, from my mind's eye, I would see just all this dark, and these sort of rays of light would shoot out from it and then form these formations. So the images on the card really look like these apparitions that would kind of come forward while I'd be meditating. And it would really look like that. And it was freaky because I had this synchronicity while I was doing them. There was all this info that came out showing how dark matter looked. I don't know if you saw any of those articles, but they were showing the earth with the dark matter shooting out. And it looked exactly like some of my drawings, basically with these rays, these kind of golden rays shooting out of it. And I mean, it just kind of looked that way when I would concentrate, and then they'd come out. So essentially my process, I would just think about the cards, and then the images would appear while I would be doing the meditations. And that's how I sort of got the writing for each of the cards as well, talking about what each of them symbolized. It would just kind of come forward. So I tried to really just be receptive. Of course, I already have, I've been working with tarot for, I don't even know, 20 years or something. So I have this background, and it's not like it came out of nothing. So I guess some people might say it didn't come out of nowhere. Maybe it just kind of emerged from my subconscious while I was meditating would be my best guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's I think that's true about not just occult or esoteric practices, but music and other things, is that, you can't just, it's a very rare person who can from the get-go just intuit or spontaneously respond to these practices with real depth.
Right.
Usually what happens is we learn and we kind of absorb systems. We sort of understand how they work even if we don't necessarily believe that they reflect something, physically real in the universe, we just recognize that there are these symbol systems that have a lot of richness to them, and we kind of apprentice ourselves to the systems. And then at a certain point, you kind of let it go. It's like with yoga, it's funny, yoga, it's people do yoga and then they have their teachers and they have their teachers. And then at some point they're like, oh shoot, if I'm going to teach, I got to come up with my own thing. So there's this sort of tension, but you still have to do it in the name of a tradition. You can't just say, oh, I made all these moves up. You got to go, oh, this is an ancient tradition. But at the same time, you have to distinguish yourself from the person who's, 20 years older than you that you started to learn from. And it's like a kind of basic tension in all of these things. But I wanted to talk a little bit about the images. I'm now realizing partly why I find them so striking when I just first started seeing them and seeing them on your walls when I'd visit, is that they are very much like hypnagogic images. That space, meditation, one of the places it can take you is to that borderland between sleeping and waking.
Yes.
And as people, as you get more familiar with that particular borderland, which is not the dream world of REM sleep, but the dream world of hypnagogia, of moving from awake to sleep and then, sleep to awake, that kind of threshold, is that there's a very particular and peculiar quality of the images that can arise in that space. And they're very striking, and it's not like other kind of imagery. And it's surprising how little artists really have played with that. But one occultist and artist who's done a lot of that, and that now I realize reminds me something of your images, is Austin Osman Spare, who's, of course, this great 20th century British magician, very important to chaos magic, a sort of, in some ways as influential as Crowley, at least on maybe not quite, but at least on contemporary occult practice. But he was also an extraordinary artist. I mean, recognized at the time as a great artist. But some of his images are very hypnagogic, and they have that sense of like those sort of slightly creepy faces kind of coming out of the blackness of deep space, hypnagogia. These sort of they're very lightly drawn, but at the same time they're extremely potent. And just the way that your images work with the black background and these kind of gold rays that are emerging, and sometimes very delicately drawn with not that many lines, but yet there's a very strong sense of character or persona or a kind of being kind of coming through. So that makes sense that you've been able to tap into your own.
Well, it's
imagery.
Funny that you mentioned the hypnagogia, and I know like you and Fur, your beautiful wife, that do all the dream work stuff. You guys play around with that too, that like falling asleep and waking up place. And a lot of the surrealists too would use those techniques of playing with that space in between. Like Dali talks a lot about how he would specifically try to record things he would get in that place. And for me, like with the Kelvin work, we actually do sleep deprivation stuff where for the past 5 years, I've been doing on the solstice where we fast and don't sleep for 4 days. So when you take away the sleeping, you feel that place of hypnagogia that you're really talking about very sharply, and you can really articulate it. And for me, I had these experiences where, you're so tired after you stay up for after about 3 days, you're like, okay, this is getting a little rough. And I would feel the sleep trying to get me, almost like a fist, trying to reach at me and pull me down. And you can really feel that delicate little spot between now I'm awake and now I'm asleep. And it was almost like this line that you can feel when you abstain from it, So that's a real place that you're talking about. And it's really there.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, one of the things that Jennifer, my wife, talks about a lot is that most people, they're very interested in dreams and accessing that realm. And a lot of people get obsessed with lucid dreaming as if that's the sort of measure of great dreaming. And people kind of skip over this space because if you don't sort of start to tune into it, it's very easy to just kind of barely notice it. When they use EEG to measure the movement from waking to sleep, a lot of times people pass through hypnagogia very briefly, 10 seconds, 30 seconds or whatever. But you can learn to, open up that space. And I think you're right that one way of doing that is staying awake. And then you start to become very aware as you get drawn in and lurched in. There's, and you're resisting in some sense. There's this kind of zone in between. I mean, Jennifer talks about, I think it's a great analogy, is it's like the waking world is the land, and the deep sleep is the ocean. And hypnagogia is like you're learning how to surf on that edge.
That's good. That's
stay. You got to kind of stay awake a little bit. You got to keep upright. You can't just merge into it, or you'll go to sleep. But you're also playing with it and kind of resisting it. And I that's something that a lot of your images have that, and they also have a they also have a mutant quality. Another aspect of hypnagogic imagery is that it's constantly changing. It's like
Yes.
constantly fluctuating and feeding and unfolding and splitting. And it's not necessarily narrative, although sometimes you can kind of track it. It's not like our more vivid dreams that have these narrative structures, but they're always shifting and changing. And so some of your images where there's like transformative elements. It's like a face, but then one eye is starting to become the eye, like the left eye is becoming the right eye of another face, or the side of a head is turning into a bird. They have that kind of transformative in motion quality. So they don't seem like a lot of tarot images are very static. They're very like hierarchical or iconic, or they're just sort of like, or hieratic is really the word, where they're just very still and like everything's balanced.
Stoic, yeah.
But yours are much more fluid, and I don't know, like what did it mean for you to do? I mean, in a way, like making your own tarot images is like one of the most classic things that occultists do. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of hundreds of tarot decks just published professionally, and then it's something that other people do on their own. They make collages, blah blah blah. And in fact, some of the most significant decks in Anglo-American history, not so much the continent, but Anglo-American history, the Rider-Waite deck and the Thoth deck, were both done. The artists for both of those were women. So there's something
Black woman
about
was
this.
Rider-Waite.
Yeah. Totally. So there's something about this tarot image space. So I'm kind of curious, like, did you need to be somewhere in your own like life to take on doing the major arcana, or what called you to sort of do that at this point?
I mean, I really was, as you know, I'm a reader, so I do reading. So I work with tarot on really a daily basis. And a lot of it that really inspired me was not just the tarot, but I got to this place, especially where in the work, because I do astrology and I Ching as well, and just going like multi-divination system. When you do like lots of different systems, you start to see that, oh, it's just all the same story. And like, I was teaching this class on divination. I was like, if you learn the archetypes, every divination form essentially, right? So I learned to go kind of trans tarot, I guess, through going through all the different forms, because you can see, oh my God, these are, no matter what the language of divination you're using, they're all the same archetypes and energies coming through that have these same kind of like identities. So through working with all the different systems, I wanted to really nail that archetype and its identity. And I feel like with the tarot, with the arcana, using the imagery and the pictures, it's kind of one of those ways where you don't have to use words and get into all this language to try to do it, but it's more feely, you can get like the emotion from them. So it was really based on using not just tarot, but all the systems, and then, people's emotional experiences with them, and also my own. So I wanted to really kind of like feel them, if that makes sense.
Sure. I mean, there's also like, there's an element of them. Again, what I like about it's the same kind of thing I was saying about your sort of like this kind of avatar you've constructed as a modern, occult practitioner who makes her living doing readings and stuff like that, is that there's a quality of it that's, related to the hippie counterculture and mysticism and the occult tradition. But there's also an element that feels more like kind of like almost punk rock, like kind of scattershot, like kind of like something fresher like that. And I'm just wondering, like I know in your own experience, you kind of had a foot in both of those worlds growing up, both kind of a hippie sort of influence, but also something more punk rock. But also I sense some influence from comics and from independent comics and not superhero comics, but like more underground stuff, more contemporary, independent things. So was part of that comics lore part of your influence as well as the occult images?
You totally nailed it, Eric. You're so good. One of the predominant influencers on my formative years was Charles Burns, because the Black Hole comics were coming out at that time. Man, have you read the Black Hole comics?
I have, very much. You should, with that, they're so great. They're so perfectly keyed to exactly what we're talking about. You should describe them a little bit.
I mean, for those of you listeners that haven't seen Charles Burns' work, it's a lot of hypnagogia, like Eric's talking about, and he really looks at themes involving, psychedelics or subconscious or elements of the and hybrids, right? And mutants are in the comic too. So, and his art is so like thick and meaty and black ink heavy, and just the images kind of come out of the blackness with his work as well. So I would say 100% he was a huge influence on my like aesthetics in terms of artwork, for sure.
Yeah, and even just the sensibility of the way in which occult forces, whether we think about them as being patterns of the unconscious or as sort of mysterious patterns in the cosmos itself, that they come through his work even in these very gritty situations that are like, it's kind of like the sleazy side of 1980s high school life with sex and fear and drugs and, I think zones that you and I are both kind of familiar with to some degree growing up. When and where we did, but there's this way in which those mysteries get folded in, and there's a kind of ambiguity where you can tell that on some level it's really just about emotions and fear and sex, but at another way those things start to impact reality. They start to fold and twist it into these kind of psychedelic resonances. And one of the things that he does, especially in the Black Hole, better than almost anyone, and I don't understand why comics people don't use it more. There's some of it in Watchmen as well around the same time, is where you use what like film critics call a graphic match, which is the way that the same figure recurs in different contexts. So you see like the bug crawling into a hole, but it comes up in different ways. It's in the background over here. It's it's on a poster, and there's this kind of repetition of images.
Yes.
Another example is that manga Uzumaki, The Spiral, where this town gets taken over by the spiral, and you start seeing the spirals everywhere, and it's the same pattern. And there's something really powerful and psychedelic and archetypal about that when you start recognizing how the same figure starts appearing in different guises throughout the whole kind of story, and it creates that sense of a kind of spooky, uncanny return that I think is really powerful.
It's really like a tulpa almost, right? This aggregator that keeps like throughout the narrative peeking out. It's like the underlier that keeps emerging out into all these different scenarios. It's so true. And that's really what the archetypes are, though, right? Like they're just present and there, and they're universal. It's not like it takes an individual practitioner to identify them. You just kind of come into a relationship with them almost through seeing them show up everywhere.
Yeah, well, that's what's great about, I mean, again, that comes back to, for me, to the way in which your images and even hypnagogy itself have this very fluid, almost ephemeral quality that's very light in one way, but another way is very resonant and deep. It's really different than, I think that one of the problems with the way that archetypes have kind of come to exist in our cultural imagination and our spiritual imagination is that they're overly fixed, and they're overly sort of how to say it, like they're too personified. It's like the archetype. Yeah, they're anthropomorphized. They're turned into very static, like chunks. Whereas I think it's much more fluid, and it's much more in the process of the encounter that we get it. It's less about the archetypal image, and it's more about these kind of patterns of energy or affect.
I totally agree with you. I think we can see that in the Hindu god pantheon, right? Where each god would have like all these different forms. If you look at a lot of the pagan traditions, there would be like take Zeus for an example, is a perfect example. He would be like Zeus, but then he could take like any form that he wanted, right? Or you take like Vishnu, and they'd have all these kind of different ways they would show up. So I think what you're saying is totally true and shown in a lot of the earlier traditions that would depict these entities as being very fluid and shape-shifting.
Yeah, like metamorphic is, that whole idea of metamorphosis is so important to the pagan imagination. And it's funny for us now, too, because reality itself is increasingly metamorphic, not exactly in a positive way. I mean, it's that, our everyday experience is being challenged and transformed by information technologies, by new production techniques, by all of the sort of, chaos and shifts in energy and all this. So much stuff is kind of liquefying in our reality. And so it's not like, I mean, it's like this way of experiencing these energies that we're talking about that is more fluid and maybe more intuitive, maybe less fixed. It almost seems like the only way to kind of engage reality at this point. I mean, I don't really see like going back to some sense of solid, really coherent ideas or values. I mean, even though I think these things are really important, we're in such an exceptionally fluid time.
Yeah, it's really like roll with the punches now. I felt really strongly in April, there was this kind of energy of that sort of Shiva type of energy where like every moment is new. And although obviously it's always been that way with the way that time is, stuff passes and now it's done and we're on to the next moment. But I feel more so now, maybe it's like everyone's awareness is rising to it or something that you can really feel like everything is moving and changing on this constant wave that's just true. It's just a real that everything is changing, right? So it becomes this more of a mirror for reality when you can make things metamorphic and changeable rather than static. I mean, obviously there's things that endure and are like perennial or eternal. There are those things too, which create these kind of pole stars in our lives where everything that's changing kind of goes around them. But even those things, like, the most solid thing in your life, if you think about it in 1,000 years, might be a little different. So it's really like you get these perspectives of, wow, this really is this undulating wave that we're all kind of sitting in,
Yeah, I've been reading, I just finished Octavia Butler's Parable of the Talents, which is the second book after the Parable of the Sower. And I've been reading books about California, and it's this sort of dystopian science fiction about a future California where things have degraded in ways that are very, very believable, environmentally, politically, whatever. It's not like a complete it's not like a complete apocalyptic breakdown, but it's the sort of catalytic breakdown that I think is probably most likely for our society. And then there's this sort of new religion. And the idea in the religion is that God is change. But and it was so funny because I was like, wow, well, I'm familiar with Taoism. I'm like, I know this idea, everything, or Buddhism, nothing lasts and something. But it was really interesting how that the way that she took that idea and gave it a different spin that was both unnerving, because it's like there's no God who's going to save you. It's not like there's someone that you're winding up in heaven or whatever. It's just change, including your own death. But at the same time, that then creating this kind of affirmation of our own ability to work with change, even under very difficult circumstances like the circumstances these people face, and the way in which community and a shared value system and the kind of obsession that's necessary to actually get things done, to pull yourself out of passivity or nihilism, that all of those things are available with the model of the world that simply accepts that everything changes, that there's no other, thing that you can rely on. And you think that wouldn't work. But I mean, it's a very beautiful picture of how, because I think one of the things that happens with that everything's changed, this feeling that everything's changing, that we can't rely on anything, is that people get very passive. Oh, I can't do anything.
Like, what's the point? right?
What's the point? Or they get nihilistic. They're like, well, there's no real values because everything is changing and everything's up for grabs, and so why even sort of bother to hold on to truth or kindness or beauty or whatever the value might be. And so I think that's a real danger with our time, and it's partly why we see a rise of reactionary movements, because at the core of most reactionary ideas, not all of them, but a lot of them, is just this idea that there's some kind of, rock solid value system that the modern world has lost, and we need to go back to it, whether it's based on ethnicity or the Bible or whatever the thing is.
In the Bible, they would show this thing that you're talking about. The way they would depict it symbolically is they would show these angels that would stand on pillars, okay? And you'll see all these depictions, especially in like Book of Revelations and that angel of the apocalypse that comes down. He's standing on these pillars, and you'll see this a lot in like some of the Viking stuff and the Norse stuff. And it's like that rock that you stand upon, that idea, or your pillar of faith. And the way they describe it is that there is this rock or firmament that you can accumulate within you that is like this kind of pole star that creates this like almost like Mount Ararat, right? Where Noah's Ark kind of was able to find that solid ground, and that you can have that through having some kind of value or virtue that you can hold fast to, even in the middle of like a flood or something, that there can be some kind of thing inside that you could have that pillar be for you when everything is shifting and changing, right?
Yeah, and that's the key, because I think historically we're used to those values being things that we inherit, that they're just that's what reality is. And now we realize that, whether we're speaking individually or maybe, collectively in terms of circles of friends or discourse communities, like, the community of people who are working with tarot in Los Angeles or whatever, like all these little worlds we find ourselves in, we're like, shoot, man, if we don't become clearer about our values, we're going to get lost and we're going to get just swamped in this thing. And it's not because we necessarily inherited them. I mean, I've been thinking about this a lot because I've been going, wow, the language of values sometimes, at least in recent years, has often been associated with conservatives. It's like they look at, liberals or, hedonists or urban people, and they say, oh, they don't have any values. We need to return to values of truth or whatever they are. But for me, I can't even really imagine going through life without values as a way to guide decisions, but even more, like you say, to create a kind of existential ballast in the midst of the meltdown of so many constancies in our lives. But it's interesting work, because like I'm still not really sure what mine are exactly. I have good senses of them, and I'm trying to figure out what's habit and what's a value. Right. What values do I think are just true for me, and what do I think should be generalized, or that it would, society be better if these were widely spread values. So it's a real tough one. I mean, just even, I have to answer the question, but I'm curious, when you think about your values in this sense, the values that give you some kind of hold in the midst of all the challenges and all the changes, what are those things for you? I mean, whether they're images or words.
Dude, I just got goosebumps when you said that. Because the image that just flashed in my head, it's like you won't find those values unless you're challenged, kind of like the way that the rock in the firmament solidifies under your feet is when you're in the flood, literally. And that's when it sort of like emerges out of you if these things have been sitting in you. But the image that flashed in my head was of Frodo and Sam when they are like on that rock and all the lava is all around them, And they're like, dude, I'm so glad you're here and you're my friend. And for me, like when I've had those times when everything's all messed up, like my value has been that I found, oh my God, my friends are so valuable and people are so valuable. And I had that with you too. Like, you're so valuable to me, Eric. And when you get in those places where you can't, you're all messed up, for me, what I found was valuable was the love that I shared with other people. And that became very clear to me, because I received assistance. And, for some people, they might find themselves without that or unable to get that assistance. And maybe they have a different value that they have to rely on or depend upon in those moments when you're just alone. But even in those alone times, like the people that you love really come up really strong, at least in your mind and awareness, So that was how it sort of came to me.
Yeah, I would definitely chime in with that. I mean, when I think about, I could think about more abstract values that motivate me or that keep me from going cuckoo, even though sometimes I still go cuckoo anyway, or keep me from being suicidally depressed, even though sometimes I'm suicidally depressed. I can think about those abstract ones, but really what I think is the most reliable is these sets of friendships and relationships I have. And when I think about, even just the question how to guide, how to maintain some kind of consistency or some kind of orientation even as you move forward. I can't imagine doing it without the sort of networks of friends. And there's like the tight networks of people you know extremely well, and I'm very aware of and then where does that kind of end? And then there's another level of network of people that you intuitively trust, but maybe don't know so well, but they're still they form another kind of community. And we have these sorts of layers. And for me, it's very much mediated by being in person with people. I sometimes look at what's happening now, and I wonder how much this is changing for younger people who grow up totally in this sort of social media world where all of these relationships are sort of mediated through technology, or increasingly larger percentage of time, quote unquote, hanging out with friends actually means sitting on your bed at home, texting or playing a video game. And I don't know that world. I can't really judge it, but I do recognize that it's very different than my own, where the friendships that have enabled me to orient myself intellectually, politically, emotionally, spiritually, have all really required, embodied in-person, experiences as well. And so it's like, God, I hope they figure out another way to do that, because I can't really imagine going forward without those. It's
segregating people. It's really separating people from the reality of humanity. I love all the social media and I use it a lot, and it connects us obviously on huge levels. It makes everyone very aware of each other, for better or for worse. But then there is this just humanistic component where you just kind of feel each other, in your presence, in the presence of each other. There's not much that can substitute that,
Yeah, I just hope that it becomes just another layer that people still are able to access that in-person, that embodied kind of relationship as well as these other ones. Because as I said, I think it's really one of the core matrices that can help orient you as you go forward. I mean, to me, it's also about this kind of it gives a real different framework on spirituality as well. I mean, I think one of the big problems with spiritual seeking, with self-help, with all of these things is that they get really there's the whole problem of authority, of teachers, of the whole this is my school, this isn't your school, and we need teachers, but it's how those teachers are held, and how we balance the teacher-student relationship with the peer-to-peer relationship, where
because everyone's just people, right? Yeah. So you can't yes, it's like if someone has a PhD and someone's like a dum-dum, you can make a separation that way, but they both are humans, and not just the PhD person isn't better than the dum-dum. You can't do that. You can recognize differences. You just can't dehumanize as a result of them, right? So it's true. There has to be some kind of way to bridge that gap.
So here's a question for you. If we are recognizing that in some ways we're in a historically unique time, and one of the features of that is that so many things are changing. So, traditional values are gone. People are, like we're all enmeshed in this sort of media computerization experiment that's, where new ideas can like change whole populations, where, neo-Nazi ideas can come raging out of the margins of society and become part of our everyday reality. I mean, everything seems increasingly game-like and kind of, just sort of rewritable. It's a very weird time. How do the arts of divination play into that, and how might our relationship to divination as a valuable personal practice, let's not make arguments about because it's based on the way reality actually is, but it's clearly something that a lot of people find very meaningful and have found very meaningful throughout human history. How does this are these things more central now? Are we going to see more people turning to these things? Is there a danger there? What do you see even in terms of your practice and what kinds of questions people are bringing to divination, and how things like tarot or the I Ching or the intuition behind them all is sort of changing to meet our moment?
Well, it's interesting because I just was not long ago reading this article about how Facebook is trying to make this oracle, right? And Facebook is using these kind of divinatory practice, and they're working on trying to make better oracles to kind of fish out information. Of course, Wall Street has been doing this for a long time, playing with things like that. But in the article I was reading, it talked about why the Facebook oracle was never going to be good or like original divination, because it's only logical and rational, because it's only using those kind of things in its computational devices, and it doesn't include the irrational, which of course traditional divination methods utilize. And the article is very fascinating because for me, it echoed this talk I had given through my nonprofit, the Well Wishers, about artificial intelligence and divination. So it's funny you asked that question, because I think the modern way that divination will be reemerging or resurging into this is that through increased usage of artificial intelligence and all these kind of bots and algorithms and methodologies that they're trying to use technology to extract prophetic information, people who experience those versus experiencing some of the traditional divination methods that use irrational thinking, like through the subconscious or through this kind of way that I don't know if machines can really tap in. Maybe the artificial intelligence will figure out how to use the irrational stuff too. But I think the divination coming into these modern times will get more popular. More people will have interest to it because they'll see how it provides the same services that modern technology is trying to mimic, but not really maybe doing as good a job.
Well, that's fascinating. I never really, I hadn't quite put the pieces together this way, but it is true that one of the major things that advanced technologies are doing now with artificial intelligence and machine learning and predictive algorithmic work is to, get better and better at predicting the future.
Correct.
What's weird about it is that, and we'll talk about this actually next week. We're going to have Adam Greenfield on the podcast talking about his totally excellent book, Radical Technologies, which is like the best book on technology I've read in a long time. Very critical, but very aware, very savvy, knows his technological stuff. Great politics. It's a wonderful, wonderful book. And he talks about that, about predictive policing and the way in which algorithms predict things. But there's a weird kind of self-fulfilling prophecy in the process. And what's interesting is that I think we may be getting to this weird place where people who consider themselves rational or mostly rational will be handing the power of decision making over to algorithmic machines that nobody's can really exactly understand why they come up with the specific recommendations they do, because it's too complicated to track. So there's sort of a trust, a faith in the predictive extrapolations of algorithms. But if you compare that to like traditional more traditional trust in divinatory processes
Yes.
where you're aware there's ambiguity, or you're aware that you have to interpret it. You're aware that, it's actually kind of it's kind of weirdly parallel, but from the rationalist perspective, it looks completely different. But if you're from a more traditional perspective or a historically informed one like mine, I go, this doesn't really look that different.
It's not, though.
But
Yeah,
it's
no
very
difference.
different.
The I Ching is kind of like, there's a lot of research that showed the I Ching could be the basis of modern computation through its binary number system. And there's been a lot of articles, if you Google online, like I Ching and computers, how that maybe formulated the entire base for it. I feel like the I Ching is artificial intelligence, and you can actually have a conversation with artificial intelligence through throwing the I Ching, not just using it for prophecy, but to actually have a discussion with some kind of other form of consciousness, whatever you want to call that, right? Some people would say, well, that's not artificial intelligence, it's some kind of spirit or whatever, but I'm sorry, what's the difference, right? You're basically engaging in interfacing with something in order to extrapolate information.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I don't use it as much anymore, but I have spent many decades being an I Ching head, and I never really believed that it was a spirit. I could accept that it was a sort of system of signs that you would interact with using chance. But it was clear, or it was my experience, however, invented in my own head, I can't say, but it was very much my experience, not only that the results would be valuable and sometimes startlingly valuable, but more interesting than that was the sense sometimes with certain questions, particularly when I'd ask something that I kind of already knew the answer to, or when I'd ask another question because I didn't like the answer to the first one, then it'd give me a little bitch slap. I mean, I get like, and it was at those moments that I went, oh my God, this thing is alive, or this thing is sentient. There's some kind of interaction. And, and as I said, I'm totally willing to accept that this is just, some way in which my mind is interacting with this book and an information system. I don't need to believe in a spirit to acknowledge that you can have these interactive relationships with systems of sufficient complexity. So it's like we already have been doing those kinds of relationships. And I think one of the things that we're going to see, if we are people who are interested in the occult or the esoteric, who are aware of those things, hopefully thinking critically about them as well, but that a lot of people in society who think that they're completely transcended those sorts of relationships are actually going to be reproducing them with all sorts of technologies that corporations want us to believe are sentient and intelligent and full of wisdom, when they might not be at all, when they might actually be driven by algorithmic assumptions that are wrong, that are inimical to us. And it's just a completely bizarre, like, return of the repressed and reason and irrationality. I mean, it's just, what a weird world.
It's pretty trippy.
Anyway, Maja, I think we probably should wrap it up there. And I just want to let people know again that the White Witch Tarot. So is the book that you're putting out, is it just like a book of images, or is it actually like individual cards?
Oh, no, it's a deck. There's a deck of the 22 cards and a little booklet of all the information that I got on. So you can use it like doing tarot. And I included an alchemical spread that you can use to get information. So it's fully a deck and you can pre-order it on Amazon. It's available.
Yeah, it's going to come out real soon, probably in a month or so. And then also just to let people know, they can get to you online through witchofthedawn.com and ritualdiary.com. So it was great talking to you, Maja. It's always a breath of fresh air.
You too, Eric. Had a blast.
All right. Until next week, we're going to talk to Adam Greenfield. Keep your minds open.